Here we go. Here we go. I'm frozen. All right. We live. Let me see where I'm at. This is where people don't like this little, like, I don't know. I guess I got one comment. It's like, don't play the stream starting soon thing. That's just some cheesy thing that people do to get people to tune in and wait. And I'm like, well, do you really want to see me like putzing around and try to figure out if I'm actually live or not? It's a little bit easier when you have a stream starting soon thing. So what's up? I was reading James's chat here. I think this is a first. That there's chat already going. Evan, what's up? Okay, so initially attracted because I don't go after a low-hanging fruit. The Ravi's actor has to take down even attempting to help Archbishop Andrew Cannon in Gaza. Yeah. Was the Shroud of Turin produced by advanced technology? Oh, you did ask that. Yeah, that's right, James. I think you did ask that. And the Shroud of Turin, yeah, the Ravi thing, I think I just have to let sleeping dogs lie on that one. It like, I was heartbroken, by his death and by everything that came out after that. But I kind of just had to let it go, because that whole thing is very sad for me. And so I don't know where things went. Soon after Ravi died, I kind of didn't pay a whole lot of attention. So I'm still kind of in the doinking around phase of the live stream where I was trying to get things set up. So welcome in. If you noticed, I got some new faces for my thumbnails. I was getting tired of the same faces over and over again. Of course, this is YouTube, and I'm an actual dad, and I'm an actual husband, and so that's part of the reason why my live stream is scheduled for 8:15. I never really feel like I'm gonna make it at 8 o'clock, and so if you want to hit the bell, you have to hit the subscribe button first. I think that's the way that works. So hit subscribe, click the bell notification, because I'm kind of 8:15 ish. But this is a Thursday, so this is an interesting one for me as well. Usually I'm live streaming Tuesday or Wednesday. Wednesday was my son's birthday, so and then Tuesday I wasn't feeling good. I had this video come out on Tuesday, and I usually don't want to double up with a new video coming out and then a live stream the same day. So I had the Joe Rogan video come out on Tuesday. Thought that I might post a short clip of it on Wednesday, but just, again, full-time actual dad, actual husband. So we'll see where that goes. Still feeling a little bit under the weather, so bear with me as I sort through, just sort of feeling out how good my voice is going to be tonight. On a scale of, I don't feel like I have a good voice in general. It's a face for radio and a voice for silent film, something like that. But I did swap up the thumbnails. I need I don't know. I don't smile well. It's hard for me to catch a decent smile, and I feel like I do have a kind of a crooked eye. So I always anyway. I had a few thumbnail faces, and I just kept using them over and over again. And I was like, I gotta stop. So, who noticed? Anybody notice? I didn't start a poll. Maybe I should. But if you noticed new thumbnails, usually the thumbnails that don't have my face in them do better. So I have the little thumbnail test thing. I did that with the Joe Rogan Notices Hidden Truth in the Bible Stories. I did the thumbnail test with the Ben Shapiro, Jonathan Pageau one, but each one of them had my, sort of, thumbnail face in it. So, the Joe Rogan one, I think it seems like it has landed on the thumbnail without my face. So there you go. I don't know what YouTube is trying to tell me, but, generally speaking, people look at they don't know me, so it's like, why is this guy's face on there? But then that's how I'm going to justify it. Maybe it's just that I'm ugly and nobody wants to. All right. So there's that. If you noticed, give me a shout out. Give me a one in the chat, or hit the like button, or do something fun and interactive to participate in this mystical, magical world that we live in, where it's not like radio and it's not like stories, but it's like a weird combination of both. And that was one thing, I tend to try to pick up the pieces where I left off. And that was one thing from the Joe Rogan Jelly Roll podcast. And I'll get to a clip here in a second. Actually, I'm going to work through, I have like an outline, and I'm going to work through it. I'm going to try to stick to it, and I'm already off, but whatever. Was that, they're talking about ancient technology and how stories are kind of ancient technology. They didn't say it like that. That's kind of my way of saying it. And and this podcast thing is, I think, unique in human history. It's almost sometimes more like a book than radio. It's a little bit more narrative. It's a little bit more dialogue, whereas radio, the format, the tool was very much more of a monologue. And like you can think of something like Rush Limbaugh. Of course he had guests, of course he engaged in dialogue, but he would go on these long monologues and just give you his opinion about things. It does seem like podcasting, in its kind of like most genuine form, is I don't know, it's sort of like a new art form. And it's different from radio, different from stories, but somehow like a weird combination of both. Let me know if you... the Shroud of Turin. I don't know what to do with the Shroud of Turin, James. I'm sorry. I wish I knew what to do with the Shroud of Turin, because it does seem like a crazy... Here's my thought, and maybe I shared this before. I'm a little skeptical of the Shroud of Turin just because the image on it doesn't look like I imagine Jesus looking. And this may shock some people. I don't know that Jesus had a beard. I'm trying to remember like what Old Testament law talks about beards on men, but if you know there's a passage there, let me know. All right. So as we pick up the pieces, I need to start with prophetic fairy tales, myths, and the Word made flesh. Jonathan Pageau.
So you think you know Wix?
I apologize for that. Jonathan Pageau and Ben Shapiro. Now, let's get to a spot where it's like, this was a good one because Ben, in my mind, really does represent the kind of the analytical thinking mind, represents kind of the left brain. He sort of even has like something of a mechanical way of talking. He's obviously very smart. He's good in a debate, but he's also kind of like robotic. He's not super personal. He's even sort of famous by saying like my facts don't care about your feelings type of thing. And which I understand why he says that. I mean, he's coming from this sort of post-Enlightenment industrial sort of facts and logic are good, but they're only one part of the equation. And that is why I love story, because story, there's a logos and a mythos. There's a logic to the story. Stories intrigue us because they make sense of the world. You can think of Lewis Carroll. He experimented with sort of nonsense poems. The Jabberwocky is one of them, right? But he couldn't quite break into true nonsense. "'Twas brillig and the slithy toaths did gyre and gimble in the wabe," right? He has to insert these like little, he has to insert real words to make the poem somewhat make sense to us, right? And so you can't really do true nonsense when it comes to story or poetry. It has to make sense. And that's the best stories. The ones that endure are the ones that make the most sense throughout time to the most amount of people. And I talked about it. And it's just interesting that here you have Jonathan Pageau and Ben Shapiro speaking about it, and then you have Joe Rogan and Jelly Roll sitting down and talking about essentially the power of story. And one of the things that I brought up, and I think it was in the Joe Rogan podcast, is just that stories have truth holding capacity, right? They hold truth. And throughout this podcast, they sort of touched on the relationship between stories and people as individuals, which I think there is a profound relationship between stories and people as individuals. I'm cutting very much to the end of my live stream today, but I'm taking this class from Martin Shaw, Christian Wonder Tales. I'll talk more about it at the end here. But if you're going, let me know. Give me a thumbs up in the chat, or yeah, let's do it. Because it would be fun to take it with other people that I've met through this mystical magic world called the internet. And Martin Shaw, as a storyteller, will draw out the fact that stories have a profound effect on the individual. There's a profound relationship that each person has with stories. I mean, we sort of, yeah, anyway, we tell stories. Our life is a story. And what Ben and Jonathan were touching on in this, it was kind of a short episode that they did. It was about an hour long, and I think it was probably more of a primer for the gospel panel that they did. Foundations of the West, I think, is what they're calling it, which, if that's what they're calling a panel discussion on the Gospels, I think that they've missed what the Gospels are. They certainly are part of the foundation of the West. But there's the reason that they're the foundation of the West is because they're actually far more profound than just that. But even there, calling the Gospels something like the foundation of the West touches on the fact that stories are not just profound for the individual, they are profound for the city. They're profound for the city of man. So here's what and I'll get to this other clip from Special Operations. This is actually a clip that I've used before. What we're seeing is that where the soul of the individual is sick, the soul of the city is sick. And civilization, let's say, you could say the West, but you could just go throughout history and you could look at different civilizations, and as they crumble, one of the things that they lose is a sense of their shared story, a sense of a narrative that they all understand, and a narrative that can then focus their attention on that which is most meaningful for the city. So, and that's nourishing. It's nourishing to know not only that I can be held within a story, and the story can nourish me as an individual, but that I'm part of a community that has a shared story, and then that shared story forms a shared identity and a belonging and a true sense of belonging. And so without story, as we become dislocated from our story, we as the soul lacks nourishment. The stories feed our soul. And as that happens to the city, the soul of the city becomes sick. Now, you can pull from Socrates and the Republic here, but that's kind of where I'm going with this clip. CJ from the Dangerous History podcast was interviewed. And again, I used this a long time ago, but I just thought he draws that point out really well here in this clip. How's it going, Miss McGillicuddy? Good to see you. Hope everybody's doing well. So that's kind of the setup here for the live stream tonight. Shoot, I need to deliver. I need to deliver on the title and the thumbnail. We've talked about the previous stories as soul food. So I hope you caught a bit of that stories as soul food idea there. Joe Rogan finds hidden truth in Bible, and Ben Shapiro explores fairy tales. We'll get into Joe Rogan here a little bit more, and maybe even circle back to Ben and Jonathan's conversation, which I thought was a good one. Short though it was, I thought it was actually very, what's the word? It was, it was calorie dense. You know, it was a very dense interview. If you were listening to particularly what Jonathan Pageau had to say, though, I think some of what Ben had to say was good. Let me make sure. I think I've got this queued up correctly, but here is CJ and John from SOE. They were at for context, they were at what's called the special, the Self-Reliance Festival. It's basically somewhat of a homesteading and sort of disaster planning festival where you learn different skills, you know, for communicating on shortwave radios to food storage to all that stuff. And CJ came in as a speaker to talk about history and how essentially civilizations collapse and what are sort of the markers that we see that are common amongst these civilizations that collapse. And I think you'll find what he says here pretty interesting, because I found it interesting as well.
Because one of the things I said towards the end of my talk today is that I think that in a lot of ways, sort of like the final straw that causes an empire to collapse is when the narrative breaks. That one of the things empires are built on are narratives, that you have to have people believing that your state is good, just, inevitable, on the right side of history, and even if things aren't perfect now, is working towards a better future. And those narratives of empires, they never quite match up with reality, but there's like degrees of divergence, you know? So if, like, let's say your triumphalist narrative of you know, your exceptional empire's God-given mission in the world or whatever, let's say the narrative seems to most people to be like, maybe 10% off from the reality. That can probably still hold together, and, you know, people will still obey and pay their taxes and be patriotic. But when it's like blatantly obvious that, like, your narrative of your empire is like 99% totally the opposite of the reality, that's where even the normies who don't really think about this stuff start to go, wait a minute, the TV guy tells me we're in this wonderful, prosperous utopia, and, like, there's no food on the shelf, you know, and there's toxic chemicals.
So when do you think the spark?
So, yeah, you can endure so much sort of cognitive dissonance, right? You can endure only so much. And excuse me. Oh, well, let's see. Do I want to move on to that? And so again, your story has to correspond to reality, has to make sense, not just to the individual, but also to the community, and then it has to make sense through time. It has to be tested by time, and I think that's one of the things that we brought up in the Joe Rogan. I guess I wouldn't even call this a podcast. It's less than 15 minutes, so it's just a bit of a idea share, I guess, if you will. It's like I was listening to part of this podcast. I thought, okay, I've listened to Joe for a couple of years now, and I'm like, okay, he's on to something here. I do hear echoes of his interview with Diana Walsh Pasulka, where and I even pointed this out in this episode. And if you haven't watched these, you know, check it out. Give me the old spell it. Yeah. Exactly. When the stories don't line up, then the spell is broken. And I think we're seeing that a lot. And I speak as a North American person, sort of Western North American person. I think we're seeing that a lot, at least, for me. And I think a lot of people would maybe agree with that. The spell has been broken, but it's interesting because Joe, you can see some evolution of thought with Joe when it comes to things like the Bible and ancient stories. And I actually do think that Graham Hancock is a person that is helping. I noticed that Graham was on the podcast for today. I'll give this one a look and report back if there's anything. Does it look like it's going from red to pink? That's really weird. That's the first time I've noticed that for the play bar on YouTube, and I wonder if I'm like skidzing out here. Is that happening, or is that just like an optical illusion for me? Help me out, fam. Let me know. Is that what's happening? Do you see that? It's going pink over here. It's pink. and here it's red. Anyway, Graham is sort of helping Joe understand that I think there's more to our history than most of us realize. And then that sort of comes back to the Bible. Of course, they talk about the floods and stuff like that with Graham and Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson. And so it starts to, it's funny because you start to go, oh, maybe those Bible stories did get something right. And then once you let that little thought in, it starts to grow. I originally called this live stream "The Logos Wants to Emerge," and I thought that might be a little bit too cryptic for people, so I changed it to stories are soul food. But it does seem like once you let a little bit of that story in, the Logos, the story or the Word made flesh, sort of gets a toe in the door, and then you find the foot that is in the door, and then there's a full leg in the door, and then the divine torso shows up, right? And now you've come into contact with the person of Christ. And in the Diana Walsh Pasulka episode, one thing that was confronted, that she sort of confronted with Joe was, and she didn't do it in a confrontational way, but it was that all these stories have been passed throughout history like a game of telephone, so nobody could really make sense of it. You really don't know what was happening 5,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago. And what Diana Walsh Pasulka said was actually there's a long tradition of oral narratives being passed on, and actually that it's a really good way of preserving knowledge. I heard a lot of that come up in this episode with Jelly Roll. Let me see if I can even find that, because I thought that was sort of one of Joe's maybe more sort of like profound moments. It was like sort of, you could kind of see the light bulb go on. What did he say? How you get the story right, I think is what he... Yeah, even if like there's something hidden that story right, he thinks that it's... No. You get your story right. What does he say? Yeah, those Bible stories. Maybe those Bible stories did have something to that. Now you can see how bad I am about... Yeah, he said it. Anyway, so there was sort of shades of that Diana Walsh Pasulka episode in there. And then let me see. At 41 seconds, at least on my they start talking about the campfires, right? And that around the campfire we used to talk and tell stories. And this made me think of Grim Grizz, because I feel like Grim, he talks about this, but I couldn't find a clip of him talking about how the campfire circuitry, is heavily ingrained in us, that when you're sitting around the flickering lights of a campfire, you're hearing stories, you feel like wisdom and truth is being passed to you, which is also a way of trying to deceive people, because the screens, the TV screen set, the phone screen, the computer screen, mimic that campfire, that flickering light of the campfire, and it sends a signal into your sort of like neurocircuitry that says, the wise ones are speaking, you should really listen. You're getting a download of wisdom and knowledge, and you should listen and obey. And so some people are trying to hijack that sort of circuitry and manipulate people. So Grizz, if you watch this, shout out to Grim Grizz, and then maybe, I don't know, maybe help me find that link. I don't know. I'm pretty sure you've said that before. But yeah, the campfire, man, the campfire. Don't we want to go back to those days when we could sit around the campfire? Here it is.
Stories ever. I think we're all in the storytelling business, right? That's what I do too. Sure. I'm telling stories. I'm not doing it in a comedic way, but I'm still telling a story. You know what I mean? Like, it's all that kind of story. I am attracted to storytellers. I
think we all are. I mean, that's why you love a good movie. That's why you love a good book.
Yeah. Especially one that's somebody that can tell a story that can capture you in a certain way.
I think it was probably the oldest form of entertainment, right? Once people, when they first started learning language, I bet the oldest...
Please.
Darn it.
Sign the petition.
We're sending some...
It was probably recreating a thing they saw. Had to be, right?
Yeah, for sure. But think about the old let's sit around the campfire, read
Sure,
stories. I mean,
sure.
I'm sure they were telling tales. Tall tales is what they used to call them. Think about how long we've been hearing these kind of stories of people just telling stories.
Also, back then, that was the only time in your day that you got to relax. When you're sitting around the campfire, that was the only time. It was dark out. There was nothing to do. You found all the food you're going to find, and you're going to get up in the morning and go right back at it all day long again, and then eventually find your way back to the campfire. So the campfire was like the time where people would sit around and entertain each other. Wow. In prehistory.
Yeah. Because you're thinking about it like from a hunting perspective, too. They had to go out all day and find the food.
Yeah.
You can only do that when the sun was out.
You could only do it when the sun was out, and at nighttime it's fucking dangerous because there's predators out there. So fire is the best thing to keep off the predators. You need fire, and everybody gathers around the fire because the predators don't want to come to the fire. Yeah. And that's where people learned how to tell stories. That's why we're so attracted to it.
So it's kind of awesome that this is Joe Rogan. Okay, don't need two of me. It's breaking the. Okay, to Evan's point, yes, it's a false light, but it. I think here what we're seeing is that the soul of humanity, again, it's almost like the soul of the city is coming out and saying, we have come to realize that a lot of people are using this as a false light. So that's Evan's point. It's like the set, the computer screen, the TV screen, is it maybe a false light? I wonder if part of the reason comedy and dialogue and some of those things, at least for me, are some of the best parts of the internet, because maybe it's not a false light. Maybe the light that's going on in somebody really does come through, like with Miss McGillicuddy's points. Like when you see the light bulb, when you see the lights come on in someone else, it's really cool. And the reason I sort of study, I don't know if I want to use that term, but I think that's essentially what I'm doing. I'm studying these podcasts, and I'm studying Joe Rogan's podcast. And as I do that, I get to see Joe's thought develop and his sort of philosophy evolve, and in a way that we wouldn't unless we had an intimate friendship with these people. So in a way, I'm afforded an opportunity to see growth in someone like Joe Rogan, even though I don't know Joe Rogan. He doesn't know me. We have no relation. We have no contact, right? And you see that. I mean, Russel Brand would be another one. We did sort of podcasts on that in the past to say, okay, well, Russell has sort of come out and became a Christian, and so now you're in this interesting place of looking at the fruit of someone through the internet, right? Like, does the fruit of the Spirit, does that become visible? What way would that manifest in a person's life who is kind of an online figure, a person who is, spending a lot of time and doing a lot of their conversations online? So yeah, there's a bit of a play there between the false light and the true light, and I wonder if maybe we're becoming sensitive to the fact that there is some true light out there. Now, I brought this up in the podcast, but we have to be good storytellers, and we have to be good. We have to ingest good stories, and we have to be sort of like faithful stewards of the story as a tool, as a whatever you want to call it, so that when these false stories come in, we understand it. I pointed that out in the Jonathan Pageau, and again, I'm going back and forth between these two. Okay, we got CJ because they were essentially two different conversations, but something of the same. And whenever that happens, I really try to pay attention. It's like when Jonathan Pageau over here is having a similar conversation with Ben Shapiro that Joe Rogan is having over there with Jelly Roll. It's like, what world are we in, right? Like Jonathan Pageau, an Orthodox icon carver and, storyteller, sits down with Ben Shapiro, a Jew, and kind of what would you call him? So he's sort of a logician, he's a political commentator, a Jewish political commentator, and yet they're talking about the power of story. And then Joe Rogan, who's a comedian and a podcaster, is sitting down with Jelly Roll, a musician, and they're talking about the power of story. right? And so we're afforded a view of these conversations that we wouldn't otherwise get if Ben and Jonathan were just sitting in a coffee shop somewhere, and if Joe and Jelly Roll were just sitting in a studio somewhere. We would have never been sort of privy. I don't really like that word, but we would not have been privy to their conversations. And yet here we are, and I don't know. They came out close enough in relation to that. At least I picked them up and did back-to-back episodes on them. So they must have been. I usually do something about every week or so. So they must have been the same week. And in this particular podcast, I pointed out, dag nabbit. Okay, I gotta turn off the ads, man. What I need to do, I need to get YouTube Premium, and I just haven't done it. I just can't. Okay, just bear with the two faces there for a second. But it's the Genesis story of, well, that's Cain, but it's the, no more ads. Yeah, it's the Adam and Eve story. Adam does not appear to have been a good steward of the narrative of the story that God gave him. And because of that, Eve was vulnerable to the deception of the serpent, because Adam was not a good steward of the story. Does that make sense? So we have to be good stewards of the story in a world where the false light is very much all around us, I think, right? Thank you, Grace upon Grace. The voice is great. Thank you. Thanks for coming in and saying what's up. Catch the next live. Never noticed the eye. Good. Okay. Well, yeah, it's one of those things where, of course, you notice those things about yourself, but it's good. It's good not to be self-conscious. I appreciate the encouragement. Thanks for being here. So I just thought that was really good. So we played the clip of the campfire section of this, and again, I mean, just hear Jelly Roll. He just says, like, I'm just attracted to storytellers. I'm attracted to people who tell good stories. What is that? What is that? Is it just evolution? Is it just something or is there something deeper? There's a soul nourishing effect that happens when you encounter a good story, and not just encounter it, but you ingest it. This is Martin Shaw. I mean, Martin Shaw and Paul Vanderklay, who, by the way, I thought did some stuff on Community and Story, but this would be Martin Shaw. His interview with Paul Vanderklay, he said something that just blew me away. He's talking about how young people at Stanford, they're all exceptional, but nobody's happy. And when he taught at Stanford, they noticed that the students who went through his class were far more capable in their other classes. They were just more prepared. They were less stressed. They were less filled with anxiety. And Martin said, because when there's something that happens to you when for 8 weeks you're just being held by a story. Like the story holds you. So there's something really beautiful to that. Particularly as a Christian, I think of the Word made flesh. There's something really beautiful about the idea that you can be held by a story. You can behold a story, and you can be held by a story. Yeah. All right. Hey, if you have any questions, let me know. I guess I'm actually carving through some of this content rather quickly. What did I want to do about this? Christian Wonder Tales. Yes, I wanted to show a clip here. Where does it say? Actually, I want to play 2 clips from here. One comes from 150 in the. Let's do that. Yeah. So if you have a question, let me hear it. Right about there. 150, 152. Just love it. Yeah, we are by design drawn to story because of the Word. Yeah, that's Jesus. He was a storyteller, and I almost brought up the Jesus says, "I teach in parables, so that seeing they may not see, hearing they may not hear." It's really an interesting passage, but I haven't looked into it too much. I guess that is Matthew 13:10. Matthew 13:10. I'm really bad about addresses. Why do you speak to them in parables? Jesus answered them, to you. Let me get out of the way here. To you it's been granted to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it has not been granted. For whoever has, to him more shall be given, and he will have abundance. But whoever does not have, even what he has will be taken away from him. Therefore I speak to them in parables, because while seeing they do not see, hearing they do not hear, nor do they understand. In their case, the prophecy of Isaiah is being fulfilled, which says, you will keep on hearing, but you will not understand. You will keep on seeing, but you will not perceive. For the heart of this people has become dull within their ears. They scarcely hear. They have closed their eyes. Otherwise, they would see. Otherwise, they would see. See, they do have the capacity. It's like they've lost the capacity. Or otherwise, they would see with their eyes, hear with their ears, and understand with their hearts, and return, and I would heal them. The healing. Blessed are your eyes, because you do see, and your ears, because they do hear. For truly I say to you, that many prophets and righteous men desired to see what you see and did not see it, and to hear what you hear and did not hear it. If I abide in you, and you abide in me, right? If I abide in you, and your word, and my word in you, John 15:7. If you abide in me and my word abides, takes residence in you, right? So this is what Martin Shaw was saying. You're held by a story. There's this, it takes up residence in some way. Ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you, my Father's. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. These are things I've spoken to you, that my joy may be in you. Yeah, there is something to that, Miss McGillicuddy. Diana brought up the parables that the Lord spoke that way because the story would continue with the spoken history like poetry and lyrics. Yeah, and actually Jelly Roll brings that up to Joe Rogan. Because you can remember stories better than sort of propositional, sort of phrases or philosophy or theology. You can remember songs. You can remember that. God speaks the word into existence. You are his workmanship. That word, poema. You are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works that he's created beforehand, that you might walk in them. That's Ephesians something. I almost have that. And it doesn't necessarily mean, though they would have used that word for poem, Ephesians 2:10. It doesn't necessarily mean that, but there's an art that's going on. That God is an artist, and you are you are being crafted by an artist. There's artistry to that. And we're meant to walk in that. And I think this is good, because this is actually what I was talking about earlier. There's something more fundamental to stories that draws us to them. The Creator created the world out of the words of his mouth. Hebrews tells us that the world was created by the word of God, so that which is seen is not made out of that which is visible. And we are his workmanship. And so there is a story, like You're in a story. We're in a story. That's why stories are important to us. Stories are important to us because we are stories. We like God has written us and crafted us as it's sort of like his story. And so when we take part in that, again, we're sort of being good stewards of this tool that we've been given. You are his workmanship, and we are co-creators. So when we engage in this art form, we're doing something that's part of our nature. We're participating in God's creation in a way that I think he designed from the very beginning. Again, going back to Adam and Eve, there's a reason God didn't tell Eve what he told Adam. He gave that to Adam to pass on to Eve. It was Adam's responsibility to be sort of like God to Eve, in that God gave Adam the narrative. Adam's supposed to give the narrative to Eve, and then they're supposed to give it to their offspring. And that pattern is almost repeated in the Cain and Abel story. But look at this. It's not just story for story's sake. You are meant to walk in the story. You're walking in this. And I'm sort of using, I'm sort of being loose and fast with my words here, but we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus to walk in them for good works that, so it's almost like, again, song is a good art form as well to use, because there's harmony there. And there's that sense of you're walking in what God has for you. You're living in harmony with what God has prepared for you. And so Tolkien plays with that idea in the creation story of Middle Earth. Jelly Roll was interesting. He does mention he's like a man of faith, and he did mention that Jesus teaches in parables, doesn't really just give you the lesson. Yeah. And then they talk about drugs, which is, of course, that's just classic Joe Rogan. But I think it would be cumbersome for me to try to find those spots. I wasn't prepared beforehand. Sorry, guys. The most helpful thing Jonathan Pageau revealed to me was that reality, that our lives are a story. Thank you. Yes. Are all a story, and that the author is God, and that there's no wonder stories. That's why these wonder stories are so important for us. Yep. Because we are called to participate. We are called to walk in the good works that God has prepared beforehand. Right? That's what we're supposed to do. Yeah, very good. Very good. I had not actually seen your comment as I was sort of talking, so we're on the same page. Talk the talk and walk the walk. Yeah, you're meant to live consistent with the gospel, and you're meant to live consistent with the narrative, with the story. The greatest story is the gospel, that God, the author, wrote himself into the story. Not only are you a part of that story, but the author has written himself into the story to reveal knowledge that is not accessible to us. I mean, that's the other crazy thing. Not to slip into sort of philosophical arguments, but the argument from being is a really interesting one. That God, by definition, is a necessary being. And if you have a lower view of God, it's like, oh, God's just a super thing in the sky. It's like, okay, yeah, I don't believe that God exists either. But God, as a necessary being, must exist. Like, it's like the Aragorn. We are to God as Aragorn is to Tolkien. There would be no Aragorn with no Tolkien. And so if Aragorn as a character is ever going to understand who Tolkien is as the author, Tolkien would have to enter into the story. And he could do that because he's the author and he could write himself in. Stories have a way of guiding us, reminding us, faith, belief, life, love, even truth. And in ways that we wouldn't otherwise get to. And that's what Martin Shaw is getting at, is stories touch on sort of more profound truths than if we were to just discuss the facts of the matter, right? And something like love is a good example, because what is it? Right? What is love? And if I reduce love down to just the sort of material explanation of love, you arrive at something like love is a chemical reaction going on in my body. That's what love is. It's the experience of my brain and my body engaging with chemicals that in my environment. And that does not seem to satisfy. It's not consistent, right? Going back to the C.J. Klein thing of like, your story has to be sort of consistent with reality, otherwise it's not believable. So if you reduce something like love down to chemical reactions, it's like, that's just not believable anymore. If you reduce courage down to something just like, well, I'm just preserving my DNA, it's like, no. That is no. You've sort of broken the story there. Okay. Let's get to some Martin Shaw. I'd be really curious to know if anybody in the chat is interested in taking this class from Martin. I jumped on the opportunity, hoping that if there were limited spots, that I would still be able to get one, because I would love, I would love to take a class from Martin Shaw. And so the fact that he's online is crazy, because I don't think you could normally engage with Martin Shaw, because he's just like out in the forest somewhere in Ireland. Like, you have to go find the guy. Okay. That one.
Hey, Jonathan, pleasure to be here today, and I am really excited about this course.
So why were you attracted to these stories, these Christian wonder tales? Like, what is it about them?
I like them because you're not clinging on to them in the way you may one of the Gospels, for example. There's a kind of looseness to them. There's a sense that it's a kind of an abandoned Christian mythology, really. And at the beginning of this year, I was on the smallest of the Aran Islands, off island, so it's a remote island. And I spent some time really on vigil in the remains of a chapel of a woman called St. Gobnet, who...
Okay. What I really wanted to hear was that clip about abandoned Christian mythology.
On to them in the way you may one of the Gospels, for example. There's a kind of looseness to them. There's a sense that it's a kind of an abandoned Christian mythology, really.
Yeah, and there you go. Is that it? Hi, Sherry. Good to see you. Good to see you. There's sort of an abandoned Christian mythology. It's so funny that somebody can put into words something you've been thinking about, and not like you don't have words. I remember that happening on I think it was a Premiere Unbelievable podcast where, and I can't even remember the lady's name, but she said that people desire connection with the wisdom of the ancient past. And I was like, yes, that is it. And this idea now sort of coming full circle with Martin Shaw, that's like, is there a rediscovering of something that we might call an abandoned Christian mythology? You could go, and this will be really interesting to explore, particularly because if you go way back, something that Louis Marcos and I talked about when I had Louis Marcos on the podcast, and actually Kale and I think talked about this as well, was just the idea that there are these like ancient stories, and I don't quite know what to do with them, because they're sort of pagan in their origin, and yet some of them really do prepare you to hear the gospel. Like it prepared the Hellenistic world to understand the person of Christ. So their pagan mythology really was like a forerunner to the gospel. A preparatio evangelica is a way of saying that, and now, did we lose something in our sort of desire? I guess, like I said, it'll be interesting to explore this, and I don't quite have the words figured out. And it doesn't work if you don't say the words right. But there was sort of a desire, a real like a real commitment not to fall into heresy, which is a good commitment. And so don't touch those pagan myths over there. And because of that, we did sort of lose what God was ultimately up to, which was he was preparing us to really hear the gospel. Because you catch glimpses of that gospel story in all these other places, like surprising places, which is part of what this podcast is exploring in a modern context. Is I hear Joe Rogan and Russel Brand and Jordan Peterson, and I hear these voices sort of stumbling upon gospel truth without sometimes even knowing it. Like I think that has happened with Graham and Joe in the past. I've only actually surprisingly done one podcast video where I featured Graham and Joe's conversations, but they have been really impactful because they do seem to stumble on sort of what you might call like a common grace. Like there's you hear this in certain musicians or poets. It's like, yeah, you're touching on something there, though you're not being sort of explicitly Christian about it. There's very Christian sort of truth bubbling up to the surface as people engage in art, poetry, and what have you, or storytelling for that matter. So it'll be really interesting to explore the idea of sort of the abandoned Christian myth. And of course, he's talking about actual like stories that have been lost. And interestingly, I should have said this when I played the C.J. Klein clip. He was talking about national stories like George Washington chopping down the cherry tree type of story that we have here in America, or Honest Abe, walking 5 miles back to return 2 pennies. We've heard these sort of like American myths, and I think that's what CJ was talking about. But I think there is, as we engage with stories, there's something even deeper that sort of holds communities together, more than just sort of like a national mythology. Yeah, so that will be, again, I don't know that I have all the words figured out just yet, but it'll be very interesting to explore. Okay, the next clip was 21:53 from this one. We'll see if I'm going to try to channel my best sort of Grim Grizz live stream mode here. Right there.
The best side hustle to do in 2024 is
we get hit with the ad. Okay.
Because obviously you'd have never so there are deep analogies in us that resonate in these stories, even though we don't understand them.
Yes, and I think it comes to that very strange notion that we find all over the world, that humans have a soul. And a soul is not fed. It seems that the soul is not fed entirely by logic. And usually in our life, the times we feel most profoundly alive are in times of great distress or great wonder. But in some way, the soul seems to wake up. And traditionally, in many cultures that are ritually savvy, that don't have an understanding of, initiation, mythologies, the slow process of growing into a human being, we are fed by images. We're not fed really by ideas. Ideas are interesting and we can puzzle on them. But when we want to be absolutely poleaxed by wonder, it is a story, one way or another, that is going to do it. You and I would have been in church on Sunday.
It's a story, one way or another, that's going to do it. It's true. It's true. Yeah. So there you go. Stories are soul food. And to Miss McGillicuddy's point, do you think it might have also been a preparation of sorts because of it being twisted like a lie with two truths? So I wonder if what you're asking, and if I get it wrong, let me know, is in the same way that we might have been prepared to receive the gospel, are there other forces at work that are trying to prepare us to receive a false gospel? And the answer is yes, because this, like Martin Shaw is saying here, The soul is fed on stories. And I'm thinking, and I've used this clip a few times, and I didn't prepare it because I just thought I'd do it from memory, from that Paul Vanderklay egregore video, where he goes into the screw tape letters, right? And he says, our Father below, this is Uncle Screwtape talking, wants them for food. The demons, the demonic forces, the powers and principalities of darkness want your soul for food, but the Father above, our Heavenly Father, He feeds us. He feeds our souls and wants to nourish our souls. So there is some sort of interplay there of our soul being fed by stories and being leached off, we're being sort of consumed by lies. Like our souls become a little thin, a little misused, a little fatigued, a little malnourished by the lies. And so then the question is, what sort of egregore, what sort of spirit then is being nourished if we are being deprived of nourishment, right? Nature abhors a vacuum. It doesn't just go into nothingness, I don't think. And so our Heavenly Father feeds us through story. The greatest story is the gospel that He's given us, that He lived. He indwelt that story. The Word became flesh, dwelt among us, made His home, made His tabernacle with us, right? And then the verses that we've even talked about earlier is like we're in Him, He is in us, that whole thing. And it certainly does seem like there is an opposing force to that. Not equal, but certainly in opposition to it. I think I've said that 1 ounce of glory, 1 ounce of God's glory far outweighs the metric tons of pain that we might experience in this world. Like Paul, in one of his letters, says that the overwhelming weight of glory is not worthy of being compared to these light and momentary trials are not worthy of being compared to the overwhelming weight of glory, right? That kind of idea. So, good stuff. Stories, I love it. I think this is going to be, we might play on this theme for a while. I don't know what I'll be doing this next week. Honestly, it's kind of weird, but like it's a hard segue. But like Timcast had some interesting interviews that I might pull from. I'm definitely going to listen to this Joe Rogan, Graham Hancock interview. I don't know. I might do more, but yeah, it's going to be an interesting week. Sherry says I should read The Wild Twin by Martin Shaw. Yeah, you know who else recommended? Justin from Justin's Morning Coffee. I always get Justin Wells. I don't know why I want to call him Owens. It's because of the way his Twitter handle is. But he recommended that as well. I can also recommend Smoke Hole. I thought that was a great book by Martin Shaw. I do need to get Courting the Wild Twin. I may have it on Audible, and I just haven't listened to it. But that's great. I feel like Martin Shaw is like already like a mentor to me, because like what Sherry's saying is that it's all like that Courting the Wild Twin is all about this. And I feel like Martin, I've discovered Martin Shaw at the right time of my life. So yeah, I definitely would love to read that. An image is a story. Yeah. And there's something to that. As we behold in the glass dimly, we behold, right? As we imagine. This is John Vervaeke's Imaginal. Stories create images in our mind. Images are stories. There's some kind of interplay there. And the pagans were not lies. Myth is not about truth and false. Yeah. I think that, so what would you say then? I understand what you're saying, but I do think, and Jonathan, in his conversation with Martin, said this, like, how do we get back? How do we understand that, Sherry? Like, if myth is not about true and false, what is it? I would think that it's oh man, it's almost like I said this I said this in the Martin in the Louis Marcos podcast, and I'll try to remember and go back and link all these in the description. Is that if the lie is going to be good enough to be believed, you have to smuggle in a little bit of truth in it. And then what happens, it seems, is the lie begins to die away over time, and the truth begins to feed. Like if it's a seed, it sends out its roots and it begins to feed on the decomposition of the lie. And then what you end up with is truth. Like there's something that God has ordained, it seems, in the world that is something like that process. I don't know if that's what you're getting at, or if I'm understanding it right, but there is some sort of relationship. Lies have to smuggle in truth, and yet once the truth gets in, like I said, watch out what happens. Jesus sort of conquered death by dying, right? That was the biggest surprise. It was the biggest trick. They say the biggest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he doesn't exist. But I think the greatest trick ever pulled, period, was when Jesus submitted to death and then used death to defeat death, right? He used the weapons of the enemy to defeat the enemy. I wonder if maybe, that would be a good clip to kind of wrap things up. What does he say? How do we get back? I think he says something like, how do we get back? How do we... you know what? How do we know? It doesn't always work when you try to search the transcript, doesn't it? It's towards the end, I know that. Yep, death defeats death. I mean, it's there in the Harry Potter story, too, if you read that, right? So he takes this little piece of Voldemort with him into death, that idea. So then, the author of death dies because of that. How do we get back? Let me see if it's right here. Let the stories do the work. That's basically what... No, it was earlier. Yeah, I'm not going to find it. But he does ask that question. I thought it was a good question. How do we rediscover? How do we get back to this world where these stories are profound to us? So I'm going to chill out for a second. No worries. I wish I would have been more active, but I just got out of work. Evan, I appreciate it, man. I've been there. Every time Paul Vanderklay goes live, I feel like I want to work my schedule around that. And others, I want to join in all of these. I want to participate in a lot of these. Hopefully, and I don't know. I need to work out my camera because I use OBS to stream, and because of that, it's far more difficult for me to get people on a live stream. But in the future, I'd like to have more participation on this channel. So I'm actually going to play a little bit of a song from a buddy of mine as we sort of call it a night. Feel free to ask some questions. But my buddy, shout out to Scott. He's got some songs coming out. But he sent me this song. It's a little bit, I don't know, melodic, soothing. And I just thought it would be I need to find an outro, for these. And so hopefully you enjoy Scott. Whenever he releases his songs, I'll give you guys the links for him. But I thought this was good. And again, I'll hang out for a second in the chat. So, holy Chad is here. Chad is here to hear the song. It's going to be good. I'm going to play this while we listen.